Okay, we're on.
Okay, well, let's look at Zechariah. Again, it's the same audience as Haggai, same people, same time, you know, again, they'd had about 50,000 former exiles had arrived in Jerusalem and nearby towns. They'd had hopes of resettling the land, of building the temple. Everything was great. Their original zeal was evident. Immediately they had set up an altar. They began burnt offerings. They were ready to build. But, of course, as you know, things had just been on standby for 18 years after that. So, not only do you have God sending Haggai, he sent Zechariah at the same time. So they needed a 1-2 punch to get them moving. Now, Zechariah is a unique prophetic book in that it really contains at least a couple different genres of literature. You've got the first 6 chapters are apocalyptic. You've got these visions with symbols and all that kind of stuff. Then chapters 7 and 8 are what we often term ethical prophetic. In other words, he's really preaching a message to them, sermonizing. And then 9 through 14 is predictive prophetic. So, 1 through 6 you got apocalyptic, 7 and 8 you got forthtelling, and then 9 through 14 you got foretelling, telling the future. Now, of course, the issues here that he's addressing is, first, their need to rebuild the temple. Okay, that's number one. But there's also another need, spiritual cleansing. Because they had not just neglected the temple, they were not being faithful to the Lord in other areas as well. Now, the dominant theme here is God's intention to bless Judah. God's blessing for Judah is really the major point. But here's the point he makes. God's blessing for Judah is contingent on her repentance and obedience. Again, under the Mosaic covenant, blessing comes through obedience. No obedience, no blessing. Blessing from God was always contingent. Under the Abrahamic covenant, it wasn't. Blessing came regardless of how you lived your life. But under the Mosaic covenant, it's contingent on obedience. So there is a big difference. The way that I would outline this book is the first 6 chapters are a series of visions of restoration and judgment. Okay, so in chapters 1 through 6 you have these visions of Zechariah. We call them the night visions. And they're all about Judah's restoration and judgment of the nations around him. Chapter 7 and 8, I like to title it Fasts Changed to Feasts. In this one, the leaders come and ask him a question about their fasts, and he says if you start obeying, you could cancel out your fasts and start feasting. Fasts will be changed to feasts. And then chapters 9 through 14 are oracles of judgment and restoration. And 9 through 14 I find very significant because much of our eschatological timeline is actually based on 9 through 14. I'd grown up thinking it was based on the book of Revelation. No, actually, it's based on 9 through 14. You know, when Hal Lindsey outlines what's going to happen, this and this and this and this and this, it's really based on here, and we'll see that. Now, key people here, of course, again, just like before, Zerubbabel and Joshua are the key players that God is addressing. And so in the first 6 chapters, we have God's blessings talked about here. And there are both physical and spiritual blessings for Judah, determined by God. And there's the promise, he's going to judge the nations he used to judge them. Now at this time, Babylon has already fallen. Assyria is gone. But there's still the Persians to be dealt with. And there's still the neighboring countries that God had used to judge them to be dealt with. Now, we have 8 night visions. And it looks like they're a chiasm. So 1 and 8 are parallel to each other, 2 and 7, 3 and 6, 4 and 5. So the central point is 4 and 5. Now we're told dates of some of these at least. For example, the vision of the patrolling horsemen is somewhere in October or November of 520 BC, the same time as Haggai's messages. Okay, so we got this matchup here between Haggai and Zechariah, time-wise. And you have the patrolling horsemen. And they're going out with their chariots to patrol. They're not, these are chariot-drawn, or these are horsemen. And, they're in amongst the myrtle trees, and they go out and they go on their patrols. And it's interpreted by the angel. And what is the point of these patrolling horsemen?
Well, it's judgment, I guess.
No, this is interesting. It's not judgment in this case.
Well, God gets his vengeance in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that, yeah. Your question in our handouts was
the horns is
I had our handout.
Yeah, the horns is judgment on the nations. Horns and the craftsmen. But the horsemen.
This reading verses 10 and 11 almost gives you the impression of just like angels watching over the people just to see what they're doing, and because it says at the end of 11 that we have walked to and fro through the earth, and behold, all the earth is resting quietly.
That's right. Yeah, God is watching over them. God's superintendence of them. And in fact, what he goes on to say is, notice verse 16 and 17. A surveyor's line will be stretched out over Jerusalem. My cities will spread out through prosperity. The Lord will again comfort Zion and will again choose Jerusalem. So the point of these patrolling horsemen is that God is watching, but he also plans to restore Jerusalem. So it's a positive message. So the first one is a positive message of restoration. And I agree. The patrolling horseman indicates God's sovereign concern, and he's aware of what is happening in the world, and he's going to restore the people.
So this is your question in the handout was it's not related to Revelation. So the answer is no.
Right.
But that goes against what they're trying to tell us in Nelson's here.
Mm.
I thought that was the...
So you got to be wrong.
What's that?
I thought the question was in regards to the...
Eighth horseman, not this first one.
Okay.
Yeah. So that'd be different.
Well, when you look up chariots and horsemen,
yeah,
you don't get a clue that way.
No.
You kind of almost have to do it in the context of the book itself.
Yeah. You do.
That's where I fell down, because I tried to look it up.
Oh, no.
And every time you see horsemen, you see chariots with it, almost always.
Yeah.
And there's that peculiar verse in Kings where Elisha and Elijah, and he says, my father, the chariots and the horsemen.
Uh-huh.
And that's done twice in there, in that book. The same exact line. And I thought, well, this has got to be something. So I put it down. Wrong. So you don't think there's any, and it's always a war type thing when it's used. Okay, it's an interesting point then that you can't use figures of speech.
No, you can't.
Consistently.
No, you can't.
So
in fact, especially when the angelic interpreter gives you the interpretation.
Well, the other thing you have to look at too is the chariots and horsemen. You have two concepts. I mean, the chariots and horsemen were also out there leading the war charges and some of the fiercest battles, but they were also used to patrol the highways and the byways to protect the people that were there and to make sure that everything was quiet, everything was where it's supposed to be.
They were reinforcing the peace.
Yeah, you have a twofold idea that can go along with both.
Yeah.
So you're keying it all off this verse 8. And he called to me and spoke to me and said, yes, those who go toward the north country have given rest to my spirit.
Not just that, but also then 12 through 17. continues this vision is the angel talking.
Where I think one's in chapter 1 and one's in chapter 6.
Yeah,
When we're talking about spirit, the north giving rest,
that's
So you're saying chapter 6, 12?
no.
1:12.
1:12. 1:12 through 17.
Oh.
God intends to bless Jerusalem
Oh,
and restore them and build them up.
Yes.
we're talking about something we're going to.
Horsemen and chariots.
Well, no, I'm talking about verse 8.
Yeah.
I mean, this 8th part
Yeah.
on chapter 6, vision of the four
Oh, okay. You're talking about the 8th vision.
8th vision.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the
No, I'm
first
talking
vision.
about the first
Oh,
vision.
no wonder.
No wonder we're not making
that was
it.
the
Well-
concept. You mentioned 8 night visions.
Yeah.
We went to vision 8. All right.
Yeah. I mentioned
Yeah.
8 night visions, but then I started talking about the first one.
Well, I jumped ahead, and I apologize, but that was because in my search, it always
Ended
links
up there.
chariots and horsemen, almost, like 99% of the time.
Yeah. But there's differences.
But that's what I wanted to you about figures of speech.
Yeah. So anyhow, on this first one, he's going to restore, he's going to rebuild Jerusalem. Then you have the 4 horns and the 4 craftsmen. Now, horns symbolize what?
Power.
Power, strength, that's right, might. Now, there were 4 kingdoms that were destroyed, so, in terms of trying to interpret this. Who are the horns, who are the craftsmen? Babylon was destroyed by Medo-Persia. Medo-Persia was destroyed by Greece. Greece is destroyed by Rome. Rome is destroyed by God's kingdom. That's one interpretation. Hmm?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So the Goths and the Visigoths and the Huns are all
Yeah.
Christian?
Mhm. Actually, the barbarians who destroyed the city of Rome were Christians. That's an odd thing.
And the ones that actually.
Sort of. I mean, Christian by culture, maybe. Now, this assumes the 4 horns represent the 4 empires of the book of Daniel. So, again, that's an assumption being made. But what it does say is that God is going to judge the nations that exiled the people. Again, that's the interpretation of this. And we have to say the Babylonians exiled them, the Assyrians exiled them. They continued in their exile under Persia. Or part of them did. Actually, they don't, because they could go home after the Persian takes over. But in this one, you have these horns and these craftsmen. And so, again, God is going to judge those who've hurt them. Now, you go to the third vision, is the man with the measuring line. Is here in chapter 2. And this man has a measuring line, and he says he's going to measure Jerusalem, its width and its length. And you got all these angels coming in and out and talking to them, but they're measuring Jerusalem, and it says why? And the meaning is Jerusalem will be inhabited as towns without walls, because of the multitude of men and livestock in it. What does he mean by that? What does he mean by it'll be inhabited like a town without walls?
Well, peaceful time, right?
No.
Doesn't
Notice he
involve-
says because of the multitude of people. In other words, it's going to get such a big population, it's going to spill outside its walls.
Oh.
And that's what happened to cities often. What would happen is they'd have a walled-in area, and you'd fill it up. It'd get overcrowded, and people start building houses outside the city wall. If the enemy attack, will run back in. And it spreads, and then they build a new wall. And then it outgrows that wall. That happened to Jerusalem. You had the original wall that was rebuilt by Nehemiah. Or actually, you go back in time. You had David had the city of David. And then under Solomon, they expanded to the Temple Mount area and apparently built a wall around it. And then later on, like in Hezekiah's day, they built another wall as the city had grown on to the west, up onto the next hill. And so they had to build another wall around that. So by Jesus' day, and after Nehemiah rebuilt things and all that, there were several walls. And even just before 70 AD, they added another wall on the north side of Jerusalem, just in time for the Romans to come knock it down, because the city had continued to grow that way. And so in this vision with the measuring line, he's being promised that the city's going to outgrow its boundaries, is what it's going to do. It's going to outgrow its defenses. Because there's going to be so many people with so much of God's blessing. Now, I believe that this one is looking at Messiah's kingdom as well. This is a promise of Jerusalem's blessing when Messiah reigns. It's the same excuse me. It's the same picture you get out of Jeremiah chapters 31 and 33, out of Joel chapter 2. In other words, it's blessings on the land and on the people who live safely in Jerusalem with Messiah reigning over them. And so he's moved from the promise to restore Jerusalem to the promise to judge the people who've taken him into captivity, to the promise that Jerusalem in its restoration and its blessing is going to just bust out of the seams. And so that's promised. Then you move into chapter 3 with the vision of Joshua's cleansing. Yeah, this is the fourth vision. And in this one, Joshua's standing there filthy. And he's given new clothing. Now, what does the vision mean?
Well, it's kind of the same thing they did with Zerubbabel,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, they bring these guys out of nowhere and they give them this huge. But I just took it as a metaphor for priests cleaning up the priesthood, basically, purifying the priesthood.
Okay, purifying the priesthood. You're close. Joshua, as high priest, does what? He mediates between God and the people, and between the people and God. He's their representative before God. And excuse me. In this vision, notice what he says here in chapter 3. He says, the angel spoke and said, "Take away the filthy garments from him. See, I've removed your iniquity from you, and I will clothe you with rich robes." And so they put a clean turban on his head, and the angel of the Lord stands by. The priests represented the people, and it means one of two things. Either that the priesthood had been defiled, and now God was restoring it, or that the people represented by the priest had been defiled, and now God is restoring them, cleansing them, and making them ceremonially pure, acceptable to him. It's one of those two possibilities. But again, it's a positive message. And I do think it, in my case, I would interpret it to say Joshua is representing the nation before God, so it's really the cleansing of the nation. And that would go parallel to Haggai's, the fact that once they started rebuilding the temple and being obedient to the Lord, he began to bless them. And they were no longer under curse. So it would be the same thing. Then you have, of course, the vision in the center. Okay, that was the first of the two central parts of the chiasm. The second central part is the vision of the lampstand and the two olive trees. And an elaborate contraption where you've got this menorah being fed by these two olive trees with little tubes coming out of the olive trees providing oil for the lamps. Very interesting description of things. Again, a typical apocalyptic. But what's the promise here in chapter 4?